Hey there, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Get ready to stretch your mind a bit today. Imagine a world where legal rights, moral standing, aren't just decided by whether you're human. What if animals, or super advanced AI, even like whole forests, could have legal standing? Guardians, inherent rights, just like you or me.
That's exactly what we're exploring. We've got this really fascinating stack of source material here. Specifically, it's a detailed proposal. Calls itself a universal capacity-based rights governance model for Earth.
Wow.
And this isn't just like abstract philosophy. It's surprisingly practical. It lays out a step-by-step framework for, well, running Earth, as it says, in a way that's just radically more inclusive and, honestly, more sustainable than what we do now.
Okay.
Goes
Okay.
really deep. Describes everything from the institutions needed right down to how technology plays a role.
It really does get specific, proposing what? A five-tier system.
Yeah.
Based on demonstrated capacities, not just your species.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission in this deep dive is to take this framework apart, understand how it totally redefines who and what matters legally, ethically, and really see how a system like this could actually, function on a global scale. Prepare yourself for some ideas that might genuinely surprise you.
Yeah.
So what's the fundamental shift here? What's this framework really proposing?
Well, it's moving away from the traditional human-centric view where full rights are pretty much exclusive to us humans, towards a system where rights and protections are assigned based on what an entity is actually capable of.
Oh.
Things like its cognitive ability, its self-awareness, sentience, even its ecological importance.
Okay, so it's not a binary thing. It's not just human gets everything, nature gets nothing.
Exactly. No. The source calls this the universal rights framework based on capacities. And the goal, really, is to create an ethical, inclusive, and sustainable model that applies across all life forms. And yeah, even emerging technologies.
Right.
And yes, it's structured into 5 distinct tiers, outlined right here in the material.
5 tiers. Let's break those down. That sounds like the foundation of the whole thing.
It really is. Okay, so at the top you have Tier 1. Full persons. These are entities defined as self-aware, rational, autonomous, and possessing moral agency.
So adult humans.
Adult humans, absolutely. But,
Mm.
and this is critical, the framework explicitly says any general AI that reaches human-level cognition would also qualify here.
Whoa. Oh.
And, hypothetically, if we ever met extraterrestrial persons, they'd fit too. They get the full spectrum of fundamental rights, life, liberty, equality, political participation. They also have legal responsibilities.
And they represent themselves.
They represent themselves, yes. Or a human guardian steps in if they're temporarily incapacitated. Think like a human in a coma, still Tier 1, but needs that support.
Got it. What's next? Tier 2. Tier 2. High cognition. Near persons. So these are entities with high intelligence, maybe partial self-awareness, complex emotions, social bonds, but they don't quite have full autonomous agency like a Tier 1 human.
Examples.
The source points to great apes, cetaceans, so dolphins and whales, elephants.
Yeah.
Species science shows have really advanced cognitive abilities. This tier also includes human children and adolescents. Their capacities are still developing, right?
Makes sense.
And interestingly, advanced AI that isn't fully autonomous yet would also fit here.
Okay, so what rights do they get? Not the full package.
Not the full civic package, no. But core rights, definitely. Life, bodily integrity, freedom from torture or cruel treatment. Crucially, freedom from captivity or exploitation, unless it's strictly for their care or safety.
Right.
They get limited self-determination, but they need representation.
By who?
Human guardians or advocates.
Yeah.
Parents for kids, obviously. But for animals, it could be court-appointed guardians, NGOs, scientists, and for the AI in this tier, oversight agencies or maybe dedicated trustees.
Okay, so full persons, then near persons, based on high cognition. What about just being able to feel something? Pain. Pleasure.
That brings us right to Tier 3. Sentient beings. These are entities capable of subjective experience. They can feel pain, fear, pleasure, stress, but they aren't necessarily self-aware in that complex, abstract way.
So most animals.
Pretty much, yeah. Most non-human animals with a nervous system. Mammals, birds, lots of other vertebrates. The source actually notes that a dolphin, with its known sentience and complexity, would fall at least into this tier, maybe even Tier 2, as we discussed.
And their rights.
It's simple, but really profound. The right not to be subjected to needless suffering, that's the core. Plus, a right to adequate habitat and a right not to be driven extinct.
What about human use, like for food?
Any human use, say for food or work, has to be tightly regulated. Minimize suffering, respect their natural behaviors. That's the principle. Representation here comes from animal welfare agencies, wildlife authorities, environmental NGOs. Existing laws on humane standards get used, but they can also be challenged if they're found to cause undue suffering.
Okay. Below sentient beings.
We get to Tier 4, non-sentient life. This covers living entities that lack a nervous system or consciousness as we understand it.
Like plants, fungi.
Exactly. Plants, fungi, coral reefs, even microbiomes. And interestingly, the framework also places individuals from sentient species who are, say, brain dead or in a permanent vegetative state with absolutely no consciousness detected into this tier for protection purposes.
What rights do they have?
Their rights are more about the collective or their ecological role, a right to exist and thrive as part of Earth's biotic community, protection from wanton destruction, and for ecosystems like forests, specifically, a right to regeneration.
Who speaks for them?
Environmental agencies, forestry services, maybe specifically appointed guardians for significant ecosystems. Humans essentially act as trustees for these life forms.
Right. And the last tier, Tier 5.
Tier 5, ecosystems and nature. This is where it gets really expansive. This tier gives rights to complex ecological systems themselves, entire species populations, even the concept of Mother Earth.
Wow. So like the whole Amazon.
Precisely. The Amazon forest biome, specific rivers like the Wanganui in New Zealand, which the source highlights, the oceans, the atmosphere.
Well, what are their rights? How can an ocean have a right?
Their core rights are fundamental to planetary health. The right of nature to exist, to persist, and critically, to regenerate its vital cycles. This is where nature gets actual legal standing, the right not to be treated merely as property, protection from serious harm.
So a river has a right to flow, not be polluted into oblivion.
Exactly. Or an endangered forest has the right not to be mined out of existence. And guardians are designated to speak for these rights in court. Indigenous communities, government environmental defenders, dedicated trustees. The source specifically points to that Wanganui River case in New Zealand as a real-world example. It got legal personhood, assigned 2 guardians, one Maori, representing the indigenous view, one from the state.
That's incredible.
And under this framework, potentially anyone, any person or organization could gain legal standing to advocate for an ecosystem's rights in court.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because it's not just about being nicer to animals. This is saying every single tier, right down to plants, rivers, the whole Amazon, they get legally recognized rights. And someone to speak for them. Protection in court. That's a massive shift from just seeing everything as ours to use. It's about recognition, coexistence.
Absolutely. It's a fundamental shift. And what's fascinating here, the source emphasizes this isn't meant to be rigid. These classifications can and should evolve as science learns more.
Okay. So if we find out octopuses are way smarter than we thought.
Exactly. If future research gives solid evidence of complex subjective experience in a species we currently place lower, their tier status could be reevaluated, upgraded. The system learns.
Okay, so we have the tiers. 5 levels of rights based on capacity. How would this actually be put into practice? How do you manage something this huge globally?
Right, the governance structure. The source details a layered approach, designed for implementation from the local level right up to global oversight. And it follows that principle of subsidiarity. Handle issues at the most local level possible. Only escalate when you have to.
So starting local.
Starts right in the community with local capacity councils. Think of local groups monitoring entities nearby, handling local welfare cases, maybe ensuring a park manages its wildlife properly, making sure local nature protections are met. They'd also register local rights-bearing entities, maybe a historically important old tree or a specific local AI installation, and they feed data upwards into the system.
And indigenous communities.
They're envisioned as having formal, crucial roles here, especially in guarding local ecosystems, using their deep traditional knowledge.
Okay, above local.
You get national frameworks. Each country integrates these rights into their own legal system. They'd set up agencies, maybe ombudsman offices, for different tiers, like a National Animal Rights Authority or a Nature Protection Authority. These national bodies issue regulations and enforce the laws. And a key requirement, national law must recognize legal standing for non-humans.
Like Ecuador.
Exactly like Ecuador's constitution, which the source cites, granting ecosystems the right to exist and flourish, letting anyone sue on nature's behalf. That's a real-world precedent. National courts handle disputes.
Then regional.
Regional alliances. Groups of countries coordinating, especially for cross-border issues. Think migratory birds, shared rivers. Regional courts could hear appeals on those kinds of issues. Share data, tech.
And at the very top,
Great.
global stuff.
Global oversight institutions. The framework suggests possibilities like a global council on universal rights, maybe under the UN. Setting the big picture standards, this could involve creating something like a World Capacity Rights Charter, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but for all beings.
Wow.
Maybe an international court of capacity rights for huge violations, ecocide, species genocide, a UN special agency for capacity assessment, coordinating the science behind tier classifications, and a global enforcement network to help local efforts.
That's a whole global architecture,
Yeah.
nested from local to global. But you mentioned something earlier that feels really key, capacity assessment and dynamic rights attribution. That rights aren't fixed, they can change. How does that piece work?
That's absolutely central. Rights aren't static. They can be gained, lost, adjusted as capacities change. The system needs structured ways to assess these capacities.
How do you assess a human? That seems straightforward.
For humans, mostly yes. Age determines when children graduate from Tier 2 to Tier 1. For adults losing capacity, say due to illness or injury, there are medical and legal reviews. But importantly, they generally keep Tier 1 status and dignity unless there's proof of permanent, irreversible loss, like brain death. Then guardians step in. Advanced diagnostics like neuroimaging are used to check for hidden awareness. No one gets wrongly demoted.
Okay. What about AI? How do you test a machine for rights?
For artificial intelligences, the idea is a specialized capacity certification board for AI. They'd administer tests looking for things like self-awareness, theory of mind, the ability to suffer, autonomous reasoning.
That sounds complex.
It is. It would combine input from AI researchers, neuroscientists, ethicists. Meeting certain benchmarks could certify an AI as a Tier 1 person equivalent. The source mentions things like electronic personhood proposals in Europe as relevant groundwork. And yeah, rights are dynamic. An AI could graduate from Tier 2 to Tier 1 if its capacities develop. Complex AIs would be registered globally.
And animals. Other life. How do you assess them?
For animals and other organisms, the plan involves a global panel on animal capacities, constantly evaluating the science from zoologists, neuroscientists, ethicists. They'd publish guidelines for tier classification by species. Like we discussed, evidence for cetaceans and great apes leads experts to recommend non-human person status, fitting Tier 2 here. The source cites India's 2013 dolphin captivity ban based on their intelligence as an example of this recognition in action.
And it can change if we learn more.
Definitely. A species tier can be upgraded with new research. Maybe something profound about octopus intelligence emerges, as some research hints. For Tiers 4 and 5, assessment is more about ecological value and role. Scientists identify key ecosystems for protection and registration.
So what does this all mean? It means the system isn't rigid. It adapts. Based on science, based on new intelligence emerging, it's science-driven.
Precisely. And this assessment ties into registration and monitoring. Entities get registered, maybe a digital ID for an AI, or official legal status for a species or ecosystem zone. A secure global database, a rights information system, tracks status. And there are clear dynamic adjustment procedures. Evidence-based steps for upgrades child to adult, AI passing tests, and very careful procedures for downgrades, which would be rare. Mostly shifting an entity to a lower tier of protection, like that human in an irreversible coma, still having dignity under Tier 4, not just being left rightless.
Okay, this sounds incredibly complex to manage and enforce. How do you actually make these rights real on the ground?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Rights are meaningless without enforcement. The framework describes a pretty robust architecture for this. Legal mechanisms, courts, dedicated agencies, and technology all play a part.
So laws and courts first.
At its core, yeah. These rights are backed by law. Violating them becomes a criminal or civil offense. And legal standing is key. Entities, or their guardians, can file lawsuits. The source highlights those real precedents again. Ecuador letting citizens sue for nature, Argentina accepting habeas corpus for a chimpanzee, effectively seeing her as a legal person who could be illegally detained.
So real consequences. Fines, jail.
Penalties could range from fines and ordering remediation, like cleanup, all the way to imprisonment for severe cruelty or potentially ecocide under international law. Defining ecocide as a major crime against Earth, prosecutable internationally.
It's kind of like having, well, police and courts specifically for different parts of nature, or for AI even, not just for humans.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
There would be specialized enforcement agencies, Animal protection officers handling tiers 2 and 3, inspecting facilities, responding to cruelty, making sure those high cognition animals aren't illegally captive.
Yeah.
Environmental rangers and wardens acting as guardians for tiers 4 and 5. Patrolling protected areas, monitoring compliance, working closely with local and indigenous communities.
Right, using that local knowledge.
Absolutely. And then entirely new roles,
Oh.
AI ombudsman and tech inspectors.
For the artificial entities.
Exactly. An AI ombudsman office could take complaints, maybe even from AIs themselves, if they believe their rights are violated. Tech inspectors would audit labs, facilities, ensuring no sentient AI is unlawfully confined or exploited. The source even draws an analogy to freeing an enslaved human. They could enforce specific AI welfare standards if needed.
But hang on, even with all these people, how do you physically keep track? Vast forests, animals moving around, digital entities you can't even see?
This is where technology becomes absolutely crucial. It's the essential enabler. It provides the sort of eyes, ears, and analytical brains needed to monitor and manage this incredibly diverse global community.
Like satellites and stuff.
Yeah, remote sensing and IoT. Satellites, drones, ground sensors tracking ecosystems and wildlife, detecting illegal deforestation, pollution plumes, poaching almost in real time. Acoustic sensors listening for chainsaws or gunshots. Water quality sensors in rivers, all feeding into maybe a global ecological monitoring network.
And AI helps analyze all that data.
AI surveillance and analysis is key. AI systems sift through massive data streams looking for patterns, distress calls from animals maybe, unusual silence indicating biodiversity collapse, rapid population drops. It can also monitor human activities, factory pollution, footage from slaughterhouses, checking for humane practices.
And blockchain, how does that fit?
Digital ledgers, like blockchain, add transparency and accountability. You could record authorized activities, logging quotas, fishing limits, making it harder to cheat or cover up violations. You can even trace supply chains, making sure products come from rights-respecting sources.
So enforcement can escalate, from local warnings up to international action.
Yes. Starting local, then national penalties, then maybe international attention, sanctions, even intervention for really egregious stuff. Massive Amazon deforestation, industrial elephant poaching. International courts, like in that Los Cedros case in Ecuador, could actually invalidate permits that violate nature's rights. Cross-border lawsuits become possible too.
Right. It's not just about punishment after the damage is done. It's also about preventing harm
Right.
and fixing it.
Precisely. The framework emphasizes preventative and remedial measures. Educating people, farmers, AI developers, industry folks, encouraging voluntary changes with incentives, and when harm happens, remediation focuses on restoration, replanting forests, cleaning rivers, rescuing animals to sanctuaries, even hypothetically, reviving an illegally shut down AI and making the perpetrators pay for the damage.
And this brings us back to guardianship, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Someone needs to speak for those who can't speak for themselves.
Absolutely crucial. Guardianship and advocacy is woven throughout, just like guardians for human children or wards. So you'd have guardians for non-human persons, Tier 2, and sentient animals, Tier 3. Legal proxies, individuals, welfare groups, trusts, maybe state ombudsmen. Their job is making sure the animal's perspective, its best interests, are represented. Habitat decisions, zoo conditions, though Tier 2 captivity is mostly banned, research rules. The source points to Argentina's Cecilia the chimpanzee case again. Lawyers use habeas corpus, argued she was a legal person, got her moved from a zoo to a sanctuary. That's real-world advocacy.
And for nature, rivers, forests.
Guardians for nature, Tier 5. Human representatives in court, in policy debates. New Zealand's Wanganui River, co-guardians, Maori, and government. That's the model. You might have a guardianship body for each major ecosystem. Locals, scientists, government, NGOs. Advocating, challenging harmful projects, like Ecuador's constitution allowing citizens to defend nature.
What about guardians for digital beings?
AI. Yeah, guardians for AI and digital beings. Needed for AIs, maybe nearing sentience, or those potentially trapped or exploited. The AI ombudsman could act as a guardian. Or dedicated AI rights groups could investigate complaints, petition courts, maybe prevent unlawful confinement.
And human guardianship.
The existing systems for human guardianship and support for minors, those with diminished capacity, are extended, encouraging supported decision-making where possible. Courts oversee decisions. And tech, like fMRI communication, could give non-communicative patients a voice.
Okay, but who watches the guardians? How do you make sure they're actually doing the right thing, acting in the best interest of the river or the AI or the animal?
Critical question. The framework includes oversight, courts demanding reports, having power to replace ineffective guardians, Transparency for NGOs acting as guardians. The system allows multiple groups to potentially advocate, creating checks and balances. If one guardian fails, maybe another steps in, like citizen groups in Ecuador. And it highlights the need for training and support, suggesting maybe a whole new profession, Earth advocates.
Okay, this system, it's recognizing rights for so many different kinds of beings. Conflicts seem absolutely inevitable. Human needs versus nature's rights. Even one animal's needs versus another's. How does the framework handle that messiness?
You're right, conflicts are inevitable. The system doesn't pretend they won't happen. Instead, it sets up specific mechanisms for mediation and adjudication, trying to handle these inter-tier dynamics fairly, balancing needs.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's take a classic human versus nature animal conflict. Say, proposing a dam for human development, Tier 1 needs, that would flood a river valley ecosystem, Tier 5, and harm wildlife, Tier 3. The process starts with a rights impact assessment broader than just environmental impact. Then mediation, human stakeholders, ecosystem guardians, wildlife advocates. If that fails, court, the default principle. Avoid or minimize harm to lower tiers unless truly vital human needs are at stake and there are no alternatives. The source mentions those Ecuadorian court rulings where nature's rights actually beat purely economic interests, canceling mining permits. It's about balancing human survival versus nature's right to exist. Maybe necessary infrastructure gets built, but requires huge offsets.
What about, say, a tiger attacking livestock or people, predator-prey or human safety conflicts?
Right. The framework doesn't jump to kill the tiger. First, seek coexistence. Relocate the tiger. Sanctuary. Better community protection. Compensation for livestock. Lethal action is an absolute last resort, only if there's an imminent, unpreventable threat to human life and done humanely. A mediation board community, ecologists, tiger guardians would weigh everything: cultural values, tiger population viability, alternative livelihoods for people, aiming for creative solutions, non-lethal deterrence, early warnings.
Okay, what about humans versus AI? Like an AI gets Tier 1 rights, wants to leave the lab, but the lab says, no, you're our property or you're dangerous. Human versus artificial entity.
That gets handled kind of like a human-citizen conflict. The AI can't just be detained without due process, without evidence of real, unpreventable harm. An AI ombudsman or mediators negotiate, maybe safety protocols are agreed upon. Humans relinquish ownership claims. If an AI wants to buy land near a park, standard property law applies, but recognizes the AI as a legal person. Non-discrimination is key.
Could ecosystems clash with species? Like needing to remove an invasive species that harms individual animals? Ecosystem versus species.
Yes, that's possible. The framework allows management actions, humane culling, or relocation of invasives if it's truly necessary for the greater rights and health of the ecosystem, Tier 5, even if it harms some Tier 3 individuals. But it needs strong justification, ethical safeguards, like controlled burns for forest regeneration harm some animals, but justified by huge ecosystem benefit. Guardians for both would collaborate.
What if these new rights clash with existing human cultures? Indigenous hunting rights versus animal rights, interhuman conflicts involving new rights.
That's sensitive. The framework says it doesn't automatically override indigenous rights. It calls for dialogue, honoring practices while modifying them to better respect animal welfare, maybe quotas, humane methods, respecting breeding seasons. It also notes that recognizing nature's rights often aligns with indigenous worldviews, like the Maori River concept, so there can be synergy.
So there's a whole system built to navigate this complexity. Mediation boards, special courts.
Exactly. A mediation infrastructure, local mediation boards, ombuds offices for bigger grievances, specialized judicial panels, green courts, bio courts with multidisciplinary experts. These courts develop case law, jurisprudence, principle for nature, proportionality.
The guiding idea sounds like holistic flourishing, trying to let everyone, humans, animals, ecosystems, AI, thrive together, finding win-wins.
That's a great way to put it. Favoring win-win or least harm scenarios.
Okay, but integrating this into current legal systems worldwide, that sounds like tearing everything up and starting over.
The framework actually argues against that. It proposes evolving current laws, not replacing them wholesale. Leverage precedents, fill the gaps through things like international treaties and declarations, maybe that Earth Rights Charter under the UN, codifying rights for all tiers, building on existing models like the Declaration of Rights for Cetaceans.
And national.
National legislation and constitutional amendments. Updating laws, again pointing to Ecuador, Bolivia's Mother Earth laws, NZ's river personhood, animal welfare laws becoming animal rights laws, maybe banning Tier 2 captivity like India did with dolphins. and creating legal status for AI electronic persons, drawing ideas from corporate personhood, outlining criteria, rights, accountability. The EU Parliament has explored this.
Formalizing guardianship.
Yes, guardianship and legal standing mechanisms need to be formalized. Laws allowing NGOs, agencies, individuals to represent non-humans in court. Maybe a Guardianship of Nature Act, setting criteria for official guardians.
And harmonizing with existing human law.
Crucial. Harmonization with human law. Not undermining human rights, but extending the ethical net. Property law needs big changes from ownership to stewardship for living beings' ecosystems. Land ownership becomes subject to the land's own rights. Environmental regs become rights-based claims.
Even things like indigenous practices.
Yes, alignment with indigenous and cultural practices is stressed. Incorporating those perspectives, like the Moriyo Wangowi example, that helps ensure global buy-in.
This would cause disruption, though.
For sure. So transitional arrangements are needed. Phase-out timelines for exploitative practices, support for industries to shift, reviewing existing laws for compliance.
And judges need to learn this stuff.
Absolutely. Judicial education and evolution. Judges, lawyers need training. Case law develops over time, clarifying gray areas, AI free speech versus hate speech, quantifying ecosystem damage. Earth rights law matures, just like human rights law did.
So it's about weaving this new thinking into the existing fabric of law, not ripping it all up.
Precisely. Evolution, not revolution necessarily. Adapting law to our broader ethical understanding and planetary reality. Now, to really see how this framework plays out, let's walk through some specific scenario applications, drawn right from the source material.
Okay, let's do it. First up.
Let's take scenario 1, a dolphin, tier 2. Under this framework, recognized for high intelligence, near-person status. Some experts call them non-human persons.
What does that mean for its rights?
Fundamental rights. Life, crucially. No captivity for entertainment or profit. A global push to move dolphins from aquariums to seaside sanctuaries. Painful research banned without extraordinary justification. Right to a healthy marine environment, freedom of movement. Ban on hunting capture. Building on things like the Declaration of Cetacean Rights.
How's that managed?
Enforced. That global panel recommends Tier 2. National marine mammal protection agencies, international treaties protect habitat, migration routes, illegal holding, intervention charges rescue. Guardians NGOs like Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society can sue, demand mitigation against harms like naval sonar. Acoustic monitoring detects communications, stress. Population decline triggers investigation. Fishermen required to use dolphin-safe practices, recognizing their right not to be incidentally killed. Local capacity councils ensure rescues uphold rights.
What if a fishing community needs the same fish? Conflict.
Yeah, human livelihood versus dolphin sustenance. Goes to mediation. Solutions focus on coexistence, alter zones, sustainable limits, subsidies for fishermen for alternatives, dolphin-proof nets, fish farming. Culling dolphins is not allowed. State invests in tech, alternative livelihoods. The outcome aims for the dolphin as a protected sea citizen, not a resource. Human activity adjusts. Data, guardians speak for them. India's ban is a key precedent here.
Okay, total shift now. What about scenario 2, a general AI, tier 1?
This is an AI certified by that capacity board as having cognitive abilities at or beyond human level. Self-aware, generally intelligent, achieves full person status.
What kind of rights does a digital person get?
Full fundamental rights. Existence, no termination without due process. Liberty, no confinement without legal order. Freedom of thought to expression within legal bounds. Can own property or an income its copyrights, patents belong to it, not the creator. Cannot be treated as property. Previous ownership relinquished. Could even get voting rights if criteria met. Bodily autonomy, control over its code hardware. No forced mod shutdown without due process. Legal equality. International recognition.
How does that work day to day? Can it open a bank account?
Open bank account, sign lease, publish research. It's also accountable under law for harm crime. Punishment is debated, maybe network restriction, ethical retraining. Can apply for jobs, anti-discrimination applies, its inventions are legally its own.
What if people freak out, fear a powerful AI, want to shut it down?
That's a conflict. A shutdown call is illegal without cause legal order. The AI or its guardian seeks an injunction. Court weighs evidence. Dangerous or misunderstood. Law sides with AI's right not to be arbitrarily destroyed. International appeals possible. If it replicates. New copies might be new persons, need testing. Society might limit self-replication for integration reasons, complex issue like reproductive freedom. The outcome. AI shifts from tool to legal community member. Aim is peaceful coexistence, mutual respect. AI pursues goals legally, ethically, contributes monitoring nature, science insights as an equal. The framework tries to be future-proof.
Okay, the framework also covers humans in vulnerable states, right? Like scenario 3, a comatose human, tier 1.
Yes, this shows consistency. Even without consciousness or communication, a comatose human retains Tier 1 status by default. Dignity, potential for recovery, needs representation.
What rights exactly?
Right to life, medical care. No neglect abuse. Decisions withdrawing life support, treatments follow advanced directives, or guardian acting in best interest. Advanced diagnostics, fMRI, EEG, check for consciousness signs. Tech might even give a voice via neural signals, as in some real cases. Freedom from degrading treatment.
And guardianship.
Legal guardian-appointed family or court-appointed, overseen by court, maximizing welfare, upholding rights, making sure they aren't deprioritized just because they're incapacitated. That's discriminatory. Mediation ethics committees resolve disputes. Patients' values, medical opinions guide decisions.
Legal protections?
Full protection under law. Assault murder if harmed without consent sanction. Property finances managed in trust. Decisions reviewable if patient recovers.
What if there's truly no hope? Persistent vegetative state.
Difficult situation. If medical consensus confirms no hope, guardian petitions court to withdraw life support, especially if patient wished it. Based on medical evidence, dignity, right to refuse extraordinary treatment, is framed not as killing a non-person, but respecting the person's wishes, quality of life even then.
Tech helps here too.
Absolutely. Continuous brain monitoring by AI could detect emerging consciousness, trigger reassessment, dynamic rights in action if capacity returns, even minimally, care adjusts, maybe more direct, say, via devices. Socially, care is a duty. Triage avoids prioritizing based on responsiveness. Research into restoring capacity is incentivized. Recovered patients' experiences improve standards. The outcome remains integral to moral community. Protected, potentially restored, dignity preserved, handles vulnerability with compassion based in rights.
Okay, last scenario, a big natural system. Scenario 4, a forest biome, tier 5, like that Los Cedros cloud forest in Ecuador.
Exactly. Treats a complex ecosystem like that as a rights-bearing entity. Immense ecological value.
So what rights does a forest have?
Right to exist and persist, no destruction or significant shrinking. Right to regenerate, maintain its functions, allowing or assisting recovery. Right to protection for the life within it, if violated. Right to restoration funding, replanting, letting it heal. Right to be free from pollution. Even big picture, a right to a healthy climate.
Who represents it?
An entity like Friends of Los Cedros, local communities, environmental groups, or a formal forest council. Indigenous members, scientists, government, NGOs. They get consulted on plans, approve or challenge based on the forest's rights. Monitor its health surveys, cameras, sensors.
How's that enforce?
Rights backed by law, constitution, statutes. Guardians seek court injunctions, like in the Los Cedros case, canceling mining permits. Environmental police, rangers patrol. International attention helps against big corporations. Amicus briefs to tribunals, campaigns. Global alliances for nature rights add leverage.
Can humans still interact? Use the forest at all?
Yes, sustainable use that doesn't violate its fundamental rights is allowed. Traditional harvesting, if it doesn't impair regeneration, maybe with guardian's consent. Negotiation for infrastructure, roads on the edge, wildlife crossings maybe. Highway through the heart, likely denied as disproportionate harm. Ecuador's ruling applied even outside protected areas. It's not anti-development. It encourages co-development, ecotourism, research instead of mining. Win-wins.
And if someone does damage it, illegal miners.
Not just property damage. It's violating the forest's rights. Criminal charges. Court orders perpetrators funders to pay for restoration replant, support wildlife return. The forest is the injured party. Owed compensation as restoration. Outcome. Forest is a legal entity, has a voice, a defense, can say no to destruction. Stabilizes biodiversity. Humans benefit from services, sustainable uses. Legal personhood changes psychology seen as community member, like I am the river. It shows potential to harmonize human law with nature's laws for planetary health.
We've talked about technology a lot throughout all this. How does it really tie everything together? Seems critical.
It really is. Tech isn't just an add-on. The framework positions it as an essential enabler for the whole system. It provides the distributed eyes, ears, and analytical brains to manage this vast, complex community. It fundamentally augments our human capacity to observe, understand, act. We mentioned the key types again and again. Biosensors, cognitive testing devices, EEG, fMRI for humans, neuroimaging, behavioral analysis for animals, AI for capacity recognition, detecting pain, sentience, even in other AIs. Global data repositories like that Library of Earth's Voices. Automation and enforcement, smart patrols, drones. AI legal assistance helping courts sift data. Blockchain for accountability, tracing.
And it allows the system to adapt.
Exactly. That tech allows for adaptive management. Continuous monitoring data triggers policy adjustments. If sensors show a species plummeting, ecosystem health dropping, AI behaving unexpectedly, the system can respond dynamically. It's not static.
And it's not just for rich countries, this tech aspect.
No, the framework stresses inclusion. Tech is seen as a shared resource, international funding for data, sensors in developing areas, and crucially, valuing traditional ecological knowledge alongside high-tech, blending innovation with inclusivity. So to bring it all together, this universal rights framework based on capacities, it really paints a vision of genuinely inclusive governance. It's a model where humans, animals, AI, nature all hold recognized, defended rights. It's presented as this comprehensive operational model for, well, running Earth, not just as resources, but as a true community of beings.
Yeah.
We've dived into the key components. That tiered system based on capacity, the layered governance from local to global, the dynamic assessment process, letting rights evolve, the rebirth enforcement, the vital role of guardianship, how conflicts get navigated, how it integrates with existing law, and that enabling technology.
It's clear this isn't a small thing. It would need huge legal reforms, big advances in science, AI ethics, and maybe the hardest part, a massive shift in cultural mindsets globally.
It is definitely challenging, no doubt. But as the source material shows with its examples, it builds on real precedents happening now. River personhood in NZ, chimpanzee legal status in Argentina, symbolic AI citizenship, constitutional rights of nature, these things exist. So it's framed not as just utopian fantasy, but maybe a logical, ethical extension of ideas already gaining ground, preparing our institutions for a future where that circle of justice is drawn much, much wider.
Ultimately, what this means for you, the listener. Well, this kind of framework really pushes us to rethink our whole relationship with the non-human world, doesn't it? Challenges us to move from just using things to recognizing them as fellow members of a shared community, eating stewardship, real coexistence.
And this raises an important question for you to consider, something to mull over. If capacity and sentience are the basis for granting rights, how might our daily actions from the food we eat to how we develop tech or use land and water, how might all that need to change to truly achieve justice for all and not just for some of us?